With another health chat. It's my great pleasure tonight to interview someone who is, I think, is one of the most interesting people in the health service, and I don't think there's anything else I can say about him other than just to introduce him and ask you if you will welcome, please, Dr Sam Everington. Right, you're not like Claire Gerarda, who turned up with the shortest skirt I've ever seen. We had a bit of a moment in the front row. What? It's not my socks, all right? They match, don't they? It's got. Okay, right. Are you okay?
Yeah, I was just getting the socks.
Oh, just getting the socks. Okay, right.
Well done.
It's important, of course, as well to mention the fact that we can't do these fabulous evenings without the help of Interserve and other sponsors, IMS Maxim. So, thank you very much to them. Well, Sam, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Where did it all start for you? Because I'm going to delve into your background a bit because you've got a really interesting hinterland. Did you come from a family of clinicians, doctors?
No, but our family of 7 kids. My dad was a barrister, a QC, patent barrister. A very gentle man, actually quite unlike most of the lawyers I know. And my mum was a Norwegian air hostess. Hence the Norwegian jumper, hence the Norwegian background, hence
Norwegian wood?
years spent there, hence building log cabins, hence a whole lot.
So, did you grow up in Norway?
No, but I spent every summer there on my grandfather's farm.
Do you speak Norwegian?
Yeah.
It's an unbelievably difficult language. My daughter lives in Sweden, and those Norwegian Nordic languages bear no resemblance, do they, to anything that we've got in Europe. Humor du, I think, is how do you do in Swedish, about the best I can manage, but they're difficult languages.
It's very sing-songy too.
Yeah.
It's very up and down and hurdy-gurdy, people always say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
right.
lots of rolling of the R's.
Hurdy-gurdy.
Hurdy
Yes, that's right.
is the postal boat that goes up the west coast of Norway.
Say that again?
Hurdy.
Oh, we'll take a clip for that, put it on YouTube. That's right. So, you spent a lot of summers there?
A lot of summers there. I was a trainee woodcarver at the age of 15.
Do you still do it?
3 months? No. But I did lots at the time, actually. My one passion is carving and building buildings. And that's what I would have done in my other life. And I have done. I built 2 log cabins.
In Norway?
In Norway.
Yeah.
And then at 17, I spent a year working in a shipbuilding yard as a welder. Came back to England. Became a barrister. It was the last year you could do a law degree and bar finals in one go. And but decided that wasn't for me. Actually, there was a real turning point in my life when I was a welder. And there was a fellow student who died a few yards away from me when a crane came down on top of him. And that was a key moment in my life where you know you're mortal. And actually, no, most people don't at that age, do they? You carry on living as if nothing's going to happen. That was the thing that changed it. That's what made me go into medicine.
So you became a barrister because it was a legal
My father done it. He said you like arguing, so why didn't you become a barrister?
Where did you study?
It's a court school of law, so that's
Right.
where you do your bar finals. But he was.
Did you have to get you did it all in one go? You didn't get it because these days you have to get a degree, don't you?
Last year you could do it. So
Right.
you got a degree and bar finals in one go.
In one go,
In
right?
one go.
How long did that take?
3 years.
Yeah, that's quick, isn't it? Because it's longer now.
Yeah, at least 4 years now.
Yeah.
And then I went back to do science A levels. So I did that in
So
one
were
year.
you practicing at the time?
No, didn't practice.
Right.
I've used it a lot in my life since.
Well, we're all terrified of you because we think you're a lawyer.
No, you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I've gone to it's not the dark side, is it, medicine, is it? No, I've gone away from the dark
I
side.
don't know what it is really. It's a backside. I don't know.
But the things I learnt actually as a lawyer is never ever go to a lawyer, ask for advice, because you'll pay a fortune for them to tell you why you can't do something.
Yes.
Never put anything in writing. And 99% never ends up in court, so break the rules.
Yeah. Yeah, well, rules for life. We might as well go home now. Sam Everington's Rule for Life, 597. Don't put anything in writing. That's good. So, right, so you had this seminal, horrible experience, and that left a fingerprint on your soul, I suppose. And did you think about medicine then?
I think it was more when I came back and I started being in the lawyer's world. I just knew it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And that was very early on in those 3 years. But
How old were you then?
So came back when I was 18, started
Right.
law at 18.
18, 19, 20, 21, so you were 21, 22 years old.
So 21, and then a year of A-levels and working in a bar
Yeah.
to make some money. And then to the Royal Free.
So you did the A-levels so that you could study for medicine?
Yeah.
Because you have to have physics or chemistry or maths or something.
So
you
I had
need
to
them
do
all.
chemistry, physics, and I had to do biology O-level.
Really?
In one
Yeah.
year.
Don't you do that now? It's maths and
It's
physics.
the chemistry which is the essential one.
Yeah.
That's the one you have to have.
Yeah.
I remember hitchhiking around the country to all the medical schools to beg a place.
You hitchhiked around, did you? They didn't want you.
No.
It is
Royal
interesting.
Free did.
Well,
So that's where
I
I
must tell you, who was Bruce Keogh, wasn't it? Bruce, those of you who've been before, Bruce Keogh was our guest, and I mean, here he is, the Chief Medical Officer. We went through his very interesting career, and I think he applied to 17 medical colleges before he got in. I didn't know there were 17 medical colleges, but he got thrown out, rejected from 17. He kept going because he wanted to be a doctor.
I was just determined to do it. I can't explain why. I just knew that's what I wanted to do.
But you were a contrarius. Somebody told you you couldn't.
Yeah, I remember the advice when I was at school at the age of 17 was I should go and work as an insurance clerk for an insurance company.
Yeah.
And that was very clever advice because I was determined.
Yeah, I'd rather kill myself.
I'd rather kill myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So you started off the Royal Free now, because it was very different in those days, wasn't it?
Well, it was very unusual because it used to be an all-female medical school. So in those days, that's not unusual now, but it was 50% women. That was very unusual because in most medical schools it was 10 or 20%.
Yeah. Sorry, if you couldn't hear rustling and crackling, it's because somebody in the front row is just ferreting around some tree born. I'm sorry. God. Yeah. Sorry, I've lost my plot now. Yes, Royal Free was in. Sponsored, we're sponsored by Tree Born Mints tonight, which is right. So, sorry, everybody. So was it all women?
50% women.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of people, 50% of people in the year had been and done something else. I remember the head of pharmacy at Harrods. She was 42. And she was in my year.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really interesting and unusual people.
Do
And
you-
people who hadn't just come in at the age of 17. That's, to me, that's the awful thing of medicine.
Yeah.
How can, well, not even 17, they're planning it at the time of GCSEs, and that's tragic.
Do you know, it's so interesting because this week I was at a conference on bereavement management. And one of the things that emerged in the discussion was really interesting. It was that the junior doctors have no experience of life or death. At that age, they're not even old enough to have had their granny die. You know, their entire family they're all still alive, so they have no experience of managing bereavement.
And it's worse than that. So Anis Ismail and I published a lot of research, and my son this time, we're going to be publishing research on medical schools, which I define as elite in, elite out. So 40% of medical student intake is now from private school. It should be 7%. And the elite out, of course, is actually those very same medical schools that are most likely to be elitist are the ones least likely to produce GPs.
Is there another way of looking at this in that medicine now is so hugely technical and complicated that we actually do want the brightest and best, and the cream of the crop doing it?
I'm not sure you do. I mean, yes, you want a few pointy heads, don't get me wrong. But actually, if you're talking about GPs, what you want is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some people that you're very happy they're anaesthetists and surgeons, you know what I mean? So there's a job for there's a job for everyone in medicine, but actually the emotional intelligence in primary care general practice is particularly important.
Well,
and
I was
that's not
gonna get-
automatically
well, I
going
was-
to come from 3 A stars and public schools.
No, and indeed it probably can't. I was going to get on to why did you choose? Why become a GP? Were you a GP immediately, or did you work in
Oh,
hospital?
no, I knew that straight away. Absolutely, I was very, very clear. I always loved people. I was very clear about that. I mean, the thought of being an anaesthetist that would kill me.
Yeah.
No, it's working with people. It came from my mum, actually. We always had a wild household. You never quite knew who was going to stay the night. It was always all our friends stayed. She was amazingly hospitable, amazing woman actually. Used to do Meals on Wheels. Everyone knew her in the community. She was a centre of the community and the family and everything, and that was such fun. And it's the people. That's what I really like. That's why I still do 2 days a week in general practice.
So and then you went. Where did you first go? Was the training the same? Did you do the rotations?
So 5 years, and then and did locum as a medical student. In those days, you could be a locum doctor as a medical student in your last year. I know, it's scary, isn't it?
Just the same as coming from somewhere they don't speak English.
And we had pubs in the hospital for the doctors. I can remember actually when you were surgeons on call at the Royal Britain, there was the doctor's bar. It was quite normal for the surgeon on call to be drinking a pint of beer with you and then going into the operating theatre. It was extraordinary.
And one of our mutual friends, Paul Lambden, of course, who writes our Medicine for Managers column, he studied to be a dentist at the same time as being a doctor, and you became a dentist before you became a doctor for some reason. But he was in dental practice at weekends to pay for his living expenses.
Well, that was the great thing about the Royal Free. There was nurses there on the course. There was a whole raft of different people.
Yeah.
And that was fun, and that's the diversity you want.
So when did you? So where were you first a GP?
So I then I landed up actually in Tower Hamlets completely by accident 30 years ago. I got given a council flat. In those days, if you were a potential key worker, they gave you council flats. It was extraordinary. So it was accident. Most of what I've done in my life is a complete accident. None of it's planned, I have to say. So landed there, did the GP training course there, and then started as a single-handed GP in a shop with 2 outdoor toilets. I remember them well. It was very cold in winter.
And you set up shop?
Just set up, what took
The LMC existed in those days?
Oh yes, LMC existed, but I took over from a single-handed Irish doctor who was loved by his patients. He used to get tons of whiskey every Christmas. He liked his whiskey, I think, too. And his wife, who wasn't medically qualified, in the little side room used to run the diet clinic. So he used to get these patients sitting there on a Wednesday afternoon waiting for the diet clinic, and you had to explain to them why that wasn't something you did.
Didn't do diet clinics anymore.
And in those days, we gave all our patients all their notes. They sat reading their notes, which was unheard of in those days, actually. You just didn't do that.
You know, I do remember that. Yeah. Yes, because when you came in, they gave you notes to take them to the doctor.
Yeah, no, we gave them the notes to read.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Why did you do that?
I don't know. I was always a bit... It just seemed the right thing to do. It's about the relationship with the patient. I mean, look, I'm a natural scruff, aren't I? But in those days you were supposed to wear ties and coats. That's white coats. That's what was expected of doctors. I never did that. It was much more. That's my mum taught me that. It's something about a very equal relationship, which to me was really important. That's why I don't use my titles in the surgery at all. We're all known by our first name. We don't wear ties. Never have.
And so how did you move out of the shop to where you are now?
So we then built a purpose-built surgery. In fact, we moved that surgery into Milan Hospital.
How did you fund that?
None of it we funded ourselves. I realised that actually we wouldn't be able to recruit doctors in a city. They had to buy into the practice. So we never bought any of our practice. So that one was Queen Mary University, so their student accommodation. So it was a rental stream, basically, rent reimbursement. And then the next one we did was Bromley by Bow, which is the one that's well known, and that's a charity in a church in a park, and that was built as part of the charity. And then the next one was a Darcy Centre, and the next one we took over a very failing practice.
Which is where you are now?
No, I do my clinical work 400 yards down the road from Bromley by Bow, and then Bromley by Bow I spent most of my time.
That's the famous one. Actually, we had Eric Darcy as a guest, and he was very interesting about the Darcy centres, because he said he never intended that there would be a Darcy centre in every PCT area. His idea was that they would go where they were needed.
Yeah, well, it's the politics at the time, wasn't it? That was that you must have a walk-in centre in every area, and that's why this one got built. And we just translated it into something different. His vision, I think, was very much of almost outpatients in the community. And I remember him taking him down to Bromley by Bow, and he's a surgeon after all, and showing him what primary care was really all about.
Yeah.
But he was very good. I was on his commission then and the next one.
Yeah. We found him very open-minded and a very interesting guy. Now tell us, paint us a word picture, because if you haven't been, who's been to Bromley by Bow? Who's had a look at, some of you have all been. Well, it's like a GP practice in a garden centre, isn't it, really, or a coffee shop. You know, somewhere in there, you might, if you're lucky, you might find a doctor. John, my business partner, went. You were kind enough to host a visit from some Austrian, very senior people in the Austrian health service, and they were very impressed. Just paint a picture for us what it's like.
So it is in this fantastic park, which my patients knew as Dogshit Green a few years ago. And you know those parks, don't you? You see them all over London. And the first thing we did was actually build on it. So the church was in the park. And in fact, the vicar who came along, Lord Mawson, who married me 2 years ago. I mean, not literally. So he went to the congregation, elderly, dying out as a congregation, and the community, and said, what do we do? What does the community need? And that's, in a sense, the story of Bromley by Bow. It's opening up everything and saying, let's share this space. And they said they wanted a nursery. So in fact, my 24-year-old son went to that as a workplace nursery, left at the age of 14. He's a doctor now. He wasn't a late developer, actually. He was, it was an after-school club and holiday club. And of course, it was a workplace nursery, so it was a non-taxable benefit too. And of course, it was a great way of recruiting and retaining GPs. And then we built the health wing, which is beautiful. It's made of handmade bricks. And then the cafe and the community care, and then the social enterprise barn, all done by the same architect. He's an amazing character. I think Gordon describes himself as a Marxist architect, so I'm not quite sure what that is, but I think that's quite a good description of him. And an amazing building, absolutely very human. Anybody can walk in and out. We don't have CCTV cameras, bars, glass screens or anything like that. It's incredibly informal. And if you come into the reception area, it's also an art gallery. It's the reception for everything that's in the centre. So the housing officer from the local housing estate, where I live on the local housing estate. So I go there for my keys or my parking permits or things like that. It's an incredible atmosphere. And it's about, one of the things I felt very early on, and I don't know why, was that actually what we were doing wasn't merely enough for doctors. Just being able to prescribe and refer to hospital was something really big missing. So in fact, at that lock-up shop we originally had, when we took over next door and moved to the next centre, we carried on running complementary therapy there as part of the surgery.
And now, let's talk a bit about social prescribing now, because you've sort of been in that long before it was social prescribing, haven't you, really? Recognising the sort of holistic needs of patients. So what happened? I mean, what's your feeling about social prescribing now?
Well, if I go back to what I was taught and what most people are taught at medical schools, you're taught to be a scientist, and you're taught about what is the matter with the patient. And then, of course, so you diagnose them, you define a treatment, you prescribe a drug, and of course, everybody takes the drugs and they get better. That's how it's supposed to work. Of course, it doesn't work like that at all, does it? And so social prescribing then, so you recognise that actually, and if you talk to Professor Marmot, he's very clear about it, that actually probably only 30% of health and wellbeing is delivered by us in the health service. 70% is social determinants of health, is the jobs, the education, the environment, and people's creativity or spirituality that you come from it. And so from what's the matter with somebody, just change the words, what matters to somebody, and that's what it's all about. And actually now, so in every practice now in Tower Hamlets, we're putting in the system. We've got it in 8 practices now already, where a GP, like a 2-week referral form, can tick a box which says lonely, frequent attender, weight issues, whatever, or just help, can you help my patient? It goes to the social prescribing team, and they spend at least an hour with somebody over a cup of coffee, and they can connect them potentially to 1,500 voluntary sector organisations in Tower Hamlets. GPs love it. Why this is such a winner, this model? This has taken what we've done from Bromley by Bow and found a mechanism to scale it. Now, why do GPs love it? Because if you take the most biomedical of GPs, who might say, oh, Sam, this is all Guardian reading nonsense, do you know what I mean? Actually, what they get is the frequent attender or the help that's at hand, one click away. If you take it from the patient's perspective, it really is about what matters to them. So often the box I tick is the wrong one, and that's perfectly okay. Because once you sit down with a patient, you go through it all, you really get to the bottom of what matters to them.
So who are the people that sit down and have these conversations? That's quite skilled.
So not clinicians, absolutely not clinicians. So I define them as, first of all, they've got to have those voluntary sectors, that database in their head, but in a much more human way. Because if you're really to get people to travel on a journey, it's about motivational coaching. And that's what is key to this. And part of that is knowing, for example, I remember there was a surgeon at the London who was an absolute bastard. And the patients used to come back and they used to say, oh God, he's awful, and therefore my operation was awful and the scar's awful. And then I started telling them, actually, by the way, this guy's a bastard. He's really horrible. Don't expect bedside manners. But actually, he's got really good outcomes. And they would then come back and say, gosh, you're right about him, but he's such a good surgeon. That's what this sort of person is doing. It's actually helping you. It's helping you on a journey to get to what matters to you. They're also obviously emotionally intelligent, and they're a fixer. Now, not in the sense of an East End fixer, but that's a person that you know in your communities, that give them a problem and they'll just sort it. And by the way, this isn't a clinician. It doesn't have to be somebody with lots of GCSEs or A-levels or whatever. It's that emotional intelligence, that motivation. And that
Where do you find it, Sam? Because if this is to be scalable,
yeah,
the people are key, aren't they? And if you're not careful, you'll end up
So,
what's the word I'm looking for? You're making them turn into bureaucrats. Yeah, and the next thing we know is going to be the social prescribing annual conference and the National Association of Social Prescribers. And at that point, we all just cut our wrists and bleed to death because it ain't worth living.
so you headhunt. Because I think if I say to you, you know somebody, like I'm described, yeah, so you're nodding. So you know these people in the community. So you headhunt them. And yes, you put them through a selection process and things like that. But the headhunting is critical.
What do you do? A bit of CRB check and
you do those formalities, but actually you go out and look for these people and you just ask the question. You describe the type of person you want and you network, and some people find the person for you. Every community has these people, often working in the voluntary sector and charities.
And how many have you got?
So we've got about 3 on our team. The cost of doing it throughout the whole of Tower Hamlets is about 240,000.
So they're volunteers? Or do you pay them?
Oh no, they're paid.
They're paid.
Anything between about 15 and 25,000.
Right.
The cost of it. That's your major cost.
Right.
But it's worth every penny. So as a hard-nosed clinical chair of a CCG, I'm thinking to myself, anything I can do to divert somebody from the NHS is going to save me money. And quite a lot of money. Think of somebody who actually, whether somebody needs a knee replacement or gets a knee replacement or not, it's completely random. It's got nothing to do with their knee and how bad it is or what's on an MRI scan. It's got everything to do with, did I, as a GP, the first thing I did actually was refer them to an orthopaedic surgeon, because guess what orthopaedic surgeons do? And so once you start doing things in different ways like that, you start finding a whole raft of different solutions. And pain and a painful knee absolutely relates to your circumstances. If you're in awful housing and you've got nobody spending time with you during the day, your pain is going to be worse.
Isn't it about you just deferring operations?
Not necessarily.
If I've got a sore knee, I want it fixed.
No. Be careful. Be careful with that attitude. Be careful what you ask for. I would say. I mean, when you see the complications after knee surgery or back surgery or any of these things, be careful what you ask for.
23% have to be revised, don't they?
Yeah. and they're not that successful, some of those.
Sorry, you got through?
Just a query on Periscope. Could you repeat, so scaling it out through Tower Hamlets, what's the annual cost?
So the annual cost, so we have a budget now for 240,000. We've got in 8 practices, and we're putting it now in every practice in Tower Hamlets. That's about £1 per patient. Incredibly good value for money, I would argue. Now, if you go to Royalton, they've done a study where they've picked on a specific group of patients and shown them reduced admissions to hospital. We've chosen not to do that because our attitude is, why would you not have this in every GP surgery? I mean, this should be no different to giving the GP the ability to prescribe naproxen or refer to a hospital.
Okay, let's have you got a story for us? Tell us about somebody that's gone through that you're a patient. Give us an illustration.
So, patient of mine recently. So we're also doing it with Macmillan. So they've got really interested in it actually. A patient of mine coming back time and time again had cancer, and we referred them to a social prescribing team, and they got heavily involved in one of the voluntary sector projects, and I hardly see them now. And that was somebody I was seeing consistently all the time. And when I have seen them, they're very different. Actually, what you're doing is you're giving. You know, we're really bad sometimes at taking away people's independence as doctors. Something about giving people the ability to stand on their own 2 feet.
Duncan Selby sat in that very seat, and he was head of Public Health England, and he was interesting. He talked about the need for a job, a safe place to live, and someone to love. And I thought that was a very powerful thing for him to talk about. So you're the boss of a CCG. Where are we going to go with you? You've got 212 CCGs, each costing us 300,000 a year, doing nothing, complete chaos. When are we going to get rid of that?
It's happening. It's happening is the answer. So I'm planning our demise. One of the things I've learned actually throughout.
Let's just love him.
Yeah. One of the things I've learned is don't resist change. Go with it and take advantage from it.
Yeah. Well, listen. You could set up a practice in the desert, and it would be the best practice because over the years you've morphed through the various political requirements, haven't you? Really, and you've exploited whatever there is. PCTs and their forerunners and all this bit. I mean, you're just very good at sucking the juice.
Yeah, but I really like people. I'm fascinated by people. I mean, the 2 days a week as a GP is energising. Even if it's 60 patients a day on Monday, it's absolutely energising for the rest of the week. And I reckon if you can deal daily with psychopaths and everything else, well, actually politicians are reasons. And they're great fun, actually. I mean, I sit there often with politicians, and I teach people to do this, actually, by the way, about what do you do when you go and see a politician if you're a clinician. Think of the diagnosis. Just sit there and think, and it will bring a smile to your face, actually. And then you'll humanise them. It's like if I go to Downing Street or Department of Health, I always wear my Norwegian jumpers. I dress down. And that's really, really important because you've got to bring it onto a human level. And I teach people to treat the politicians as human. You go up and you say, how are you doing? How's the family? Actually, that's how it should be. That's how it should be.
Yes.
And you'll get the best out of politicians if you do that. The moment you start wearing ties and suits and deferring to them, that's it.
I haven't got a jumper.
Yeah?
No.
Time I got you one.
But I don't want any jumper.
You don't want one of my Norwegian jumpers?
No, I do not. I would rather walk naked.
Actually, there's only one way you could get one anyway. You have to marry an Everington.
I think I've done the marriage thing. It doesn't work.
I've done it twice.
Yes, you've only just started. You've got a long way to travel. Jeremy Hunt came and spoke with us, and I think he's going to come and talk again. And I think people actually, although politicians get demonised, don't they, very easily in the press, and certainly there was a whole schmozzle over the junior doctors thing. But actually, when you talk to him calmly about what he's trying to do and all the rest of it, they're not much different than the rest of us, are they, really? They have two masters, though, don't they? They have the cabinet, which, and then they have the rest.
Yeah, I really like Jeremy Hunt. I have
Yeah.
to say. And
I
if
went
you-
out on a limb and said I thought he should stay,
Yeah.
and we supported him through the doctor strike, and I did take some flack for that. But I thought, look, it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. Yeah, can you imagine Amber Rudd coming and saying, I've got a wonderful strategy for the concert? You think, oh shit.
You know, I
Sorry,
think,
Amber.
I think you're right. I agree with you because actually, I think he's reached the point where he knows where things have gone wrong, the mistakes that have been made,
Yeah.
and I think he's in a much better position. And he does reflect now. It is about actually talks about getting away from a blame culture.
Although, have you seen, what's his name? Francis has finally woken up in the HSJ today.
Yeah.
Now he's talking about more regulation. Oh, good.
Which is
Just
why
have some
I
more.
left the legal profession.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
If you ask a
I
lawyer, you
wouldn't
get...
have, yes, I wouldn't really put a lawyer in charge of that.
No. In fact, we interviewed him, and he was very interesting, and I actually put it to him fairly robustly. I have to say that I thought that when he did his first report, which for me was gobsmacking, you know, I shall remember forever reading about the old boy who sat on a commode for 10 hours, you know, and I think his view, understandably, was tainted by that experience, and he took too much of that luggage into the public inquiry. And as a result of that, I don't think he delivered much that we couldn't have guessed.
Well,
and we haven't delivered any of it.
No, except it was a wake-up call, and that was important.
Well,
It was the same wake-up
but
call that
you-
we did on discrimination in the NHS. Nobody believed that doctors discriminated when we first.
No, well, I'll come on to that because that's a really interesting part of your career. But I mean, if we go back to Francis' report, I mean, if you look at the people who are working at Stafford, mid-staffs, I mean, I've been there 2 or 3 times, and it must be the safest hospital on God's earth now. And it was always staffed by fantastic people who were just very badly abused by the system. They didn't come to work. If you look at it, there was terrible pressure on that hospital to become a trust, an FT, and they just weren't up to it robustly enough. The balance sheet couldn't balance, so they cut the staff to make it valid. If you do the root cause analysis of what went wrong there, it was the drive to become a foundation trust.
But also it's about leadership too. So if you look at the feature probably the best trust is somebody who's been around a long time.
Yeah.
David Dalton is a classic example.
St David, we call, please.
Oh, okay.
St David.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say it's the same actually.
Or Bob
wherever you
Naylor.
look.
Naylor's
Yeah,
just left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, amazing what he achieved at UCH, and actually through leadership, by the way. And that's so. When I was on the leadership thing, the Health Service Journal with him, I got to know him. Before then, I had a very different sense of what he was. And actually, what was really powerful was the way he had surrounded himself and developed and supported clinical leaders.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah,
that surprised me because I had seen him before that as a kind of very strong, determined
No,
leader.
he's not.
but
He had
actually-
150 clinical directorates at that place and pioneered the whole idea of it.
Yeah. And that distributed leadership is the absolute key. The idea that somehow we create super leaders when we know the life expectancy of a chief exec 2 years, is it?
Yeah, it's just idea 2 and there are 20% of vacancies now. Nobody wants to do the job.
Or nobody wants to be a medical director. So we had people we interviewed on the Robert Naylor report, and they just said, "Why would I want to do it? A, I'm going to earn less, and B, it's going to be the most awful job, and everyone's going to hate me." And
Yeah.
the incentives are entirely wrongly aligned.
So what are we going to, I mean, okay, so Simon, in fact, we're interviewing Simon for the second time, I think, in December, aren't we? When it's December the 6th?
6th, yeah.
6th of December, buy your tickets, there are a few left. I mean, well, this kind of rolls into a conversation I've had today, actually, with the BBC. Want to make a programme about STPs. What they call it, it's not the engine additive that you put in your motorbike. It's
Stoppy ticket pudding. Was it?
Sticky toffee.
Sticky toffee pudding, that's it.
Or secret Tory plan.
That's right. We knew there was an acronym for something. Anyway, I mean, what you can see what he's doing there. I mean, in the audience tonight, there's some people who helped me write the Healthcare in London report for the Unite. And what we said was absolutely the missing bit is the strategic hand to help make stuff happen. not the Strategic Health Authority, but Strategic Health. And what Simon's trying to do is saying to people in the area, look, all get together and give me some kind of a reshaping of the services in the area. What do you think is best? And of course, there are 44 of them. There will be some that are good, some that won't be so good. There will some that will make a mess of it. And they've all got, 200 weeks of the 5-year forward view left. So, it ain't going to happen. But getting people together and to try and make their solutions work seems to me to be a good idea. But coming back to the CCGs, we've got to get rid of them.
Okay, so
how do you make that? Sorry, let me finish my point. I put it in a rather muddled way, but the point I'm trying to get to is there is no appetite for legislation.
No.
No parliamentary time for legislation. We've got to make what we've got work. So what do we do about the CCG?
So what we're doing is we're heading in 4 directions. So we're taking our resources CCG and heading in 4 directions. So these are, one is, so when we got the new mayor of Tower Hamlets, the first conversation with him was, John, I want to move in with you, and I want a marriage of love. I don't want a forced marriage, which took him by surprise, but it was brilliant actually, because it just made the point about what we wanted to do. So we're going to do a lot more joint commissioning with them, and I'm now deputy chair of the Health and Wellbeing Board as a result. So that's one direction. The second direction is I'm clinical lead now for the SDP, and my chief exec is also the chief exec for the SDP. So working at that level has great opportunities and potentials if you get the relationships right. The third direction is into accountable care organisations. So we've got a GP care group in Tower Hamlets. So it's actually about using that resource there. And the final direction, I often define myself as the health mayor of Tower Hamlets. So I do the press releases, I comment on things, I do some of the political stuff with a small p. And what we're talking about now with Tom Coffey as the new advisor to Sadiq Khan is helping him as 32 CCG chairs have a strong voice for health in London. I'd like to see a time where actually the leaders of the CCG chairs are as commonly in the Evening Standard as anybody else, as the mayor himself possibly. So
Boris, his predecessor Boris wanted to have the responsibility for health in London, didn't he?
Yeah, I think the difficulty for them is they just don't have the time. It's such a big job already. So there's something about how do we help them with that process. And I think that's fantastic. And we are in the final job, I'd say, actually, as a clinician, and it's the advantage of having clinicians in all of this. I see my job as protecting managers. I love managers. I can't do it, do you know what I mean? But I massively admire people who can. And one of the key jobs, so I will often go into meetings with my managers into NHS England, and I know the atmosphere changes. I know it's protective, actually. It stops that top-down behaviour rather, and you have a much more partnership approach. The first thing I did with NHS England when we became CCG was said, I'm very happy for you to assure yourself that I'm doing a good job as a CCG. But I want to assure myself that you are doing a good job as tertiary and primary care commissioners. And all our assurance meetings used to be mutual assurance meetings. And that's, to me, is a key part of how we should be behaving as clinicians, because we can do things. We're very privileged, actually. We are risk takers naturally as GPs, that's what the job's all about, but we are privileged in terms of actually being able to speak out and say some uncomfortable things, not in a nasty way, do you know what I mean? But just creating a much more equal relationship actually with the hierarchies in the NHS.
See, what I have a problem with all this is that you are unique. You've made a huge success of your practice and everything else that you've done in a unique set of circumstances, and the extent to which what you're doing, which might be regarded as the gold standard, is in some way or other translatable to the rest of the NHS, little Mucklesworth somewhere in up country, where we don't have this level of leadership and we don't have this vision.
Well, so if I was to say the most functional board I've ever sat on in my life is the NHSCC, so that's a representative of bodies and CCGs across the country. It's amazing. I invite you to come into a room of people who listen, reflect and change their minds, and full of innovation and good ideas. I think the second thing I'd say, don't ever lose clinicians again from the process. After all, if I put it bluntly, as doctors, as consultants and GPs, we spend the money. everything we do every day writes a check, in effect. And if you don't then engage the doctors in the managerial process, or the idea that managing a population, the cost to the system is enormous. And so I often say, we've gone a long way in getting GPs involved in commissioning and managing populations. It's our natural territory. What's completely missing is the equivalence on the hospital side. And I would argue, and I have argued in Downing Street and the Department of Health, that actually you should put the consultants in charge of the hospital. I mean, some of the terms for junior doctors are much better, there's no doubt about that. But you've still got a very disengaged and an unhappy workforce, and that has got to be sorted.
Do you think they should have gone on strike?
If it had been me, I wouldn't have done it personally, on a personal level. I thought it was very risky. Interestingly, the evidence, there was a lovely moment where a very senior person said to me on the first day of strike, they said, I think one patient has died. And I looked at this person, I said, don't you go out there and say it, because trust me, there's a lot of lives that have been saved on top of that. You put consultants at the front end. It was quite extraordinary, actually. There was a lovely conversation I had with some senior politicians the other day when they were terrified of the new oncoming winter crisis. And I said, look, you've got the solutions. The solutions. What happened when the junior doctors went on strike? Apart from the delays in outpatients, the hospitals, everyone I talked to said the hospitals were run beautifully. There's your answer. And the second answer, of course, I said to them also, was vaccinate everyone with flu vaccinations. You know, what is different in winter? Flu. Why didn't you vaccinate the whole population? And you can do it at no extra cost. Cost of a vaccination from a chemist is £10. That is far, far cheaper than all the rubbish medicines you will buy will have no impact on your flu afterwards. You'll spend way over £10. But we have this thing in this country that actually we can't even suggest that people should spend their own money on their own healthcare. Where have we got to? It's crazy. It's the best money you can spend.
Talking of, back to the junior doctors, I always think a bottle of scotch is probably about the best thing we can do, but anyway. The junior doctors...
We used to be able to prescribe that.
Yes.
In my day, sherry and whiskey, actually.
And Guinness, my dad used to get it.
Yeah, and the bastards took it away.
Yeah. I wonder why.
I think they realised a lot of the doctors and nurses used to secretly take a swig.
So, the junior doctors thing is not over, is it?
No. I think, well, what was really interesting, so I can remember I flew down from holiday to get to the BMA Council meeting to vote against the 5-day strike. My estimation was 40% had agreed, and there must have been another 20 to 30% who were just angry and didn't disagree. And that clearly within a few days, tons and tons of emails coming in from doctors, junior doctors saying, no way, you're not going to do the 5-day strike.
We Terry and I spent a lot of time on the picket line, made some films and stuff. And what struck me was you got some highly intelligent youngsters on the picket line. There were mainly the younger junior doctors. You said, then why are you on strike? And they said, well, because it's not fair and it's not safe. And you said, okay, well, what isn't fair? Well, it isn't fair. Well, what isn't safe? Well, it's not safe because it isn't fair, and it's not fair. And you go around this sort of Kafka circle and say, have you actually read David Dorton's letter? Have you looked at the contract? And they all said no. They didn't really know why they were on strike.
Okay, so my initial reaction when it first blew up is I can remember ringing my son round as a nice young radical Corbynist, vegan and everything. Oh, great. That's what you should be at that age. You're supposed to become more sensible when you get to our age.
Okay, fine. My past is not flashing before me.
But so I said to him, and it was a bit like what the consultants did in our day. Actually, the consultants were the problem in our day in 1989.
74, there was a strike in 74, wasn't
they?
it?
They went on strike. In 89, we didn't. The consultants were the issue. They said we did it in our day. What's the problem? And there was a bit of that coming from my generation. So I said to my son, tell me what life is like. Find out from your friends. And I tell you what's really different is that in our day, yes, we work long hours, but I can remember in the hospital, I said, we lived on site in a mess. We had meals. We weren't just eating Mars bars. We were part of a team. We were nurtured. If things went wrong, we were supported. There wasn't the medico-legal pressure that junior doctors face. Now, what you're seeing from them is that complete lack of nurturing and support, completely left on their own. And also a system in medicine. You know, in my day, if you fell in love with somebody, you'd change your job or you'd move town. Actually now, the focus seems to be utterly on you deciding you're going to be a dermatologist, and that's the focus of everything. And that's not how life works. And it's awful how we put the pressure on everyone to be a specialist. And that, by the way, is one of the biggest problems we face. I don't actually call them specialists anymore, I call them partialists. And that defines the problem. That's where we've invested all the time and energy. And the cost to that is to move us all away from a holistic approach to medicine, so that a doctor is just about your knee or your liver. That's not medicine. And we know it's not medicine because actually as the ageing population happens, you need to be able to manage a whole raft of illnesses at the same time.
And part of the problem is it not the way doctors are trained now, because the rotations are much shorter and quicker. They don't settle anywhere, they don't have a chance to connect with the hospital that they're working in.
Yeah.
So they're very much sort of transient, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, you don't feel part of something, you don't feel it's your own. And I think that's a real problem. And that, I think, is quite devastating for junior doctors. So that's the thing that needs to be solved.
Yeah, and of course we need more of them. We've got more doctors than we've ever had, but we don't have enough.
Yeah, no, we're about 500 short of everyone. Although Bulgaria now is potentially, there's lots of English students going out there and training there and ready to come back and be doctors.
Really? I wanted to talk to you as well about the work that you've done about inclusion.
Yeah.
And you tell the audience the story of when you applied for different jobs.
Nadine and Roger will
know
know
this
well,
is a great story.
because they were part of it. So Anis Ismail, Professor Ismail, who's a great friend of mine, he's a professor in Manchester. He was also the advisor to the Shipman Inquiry. And we were chatting one day, we were part of the Medical Practitioners Union, and he said to me, you know, when it comes to shortlisting, I was talking to a surgeon the other day in the operating theatre. Now, if you know surgeons in the operating theatre, they say what they think. It's quite funny at times, actually. And he said, well, when it comes to shortlisting, it's quite simple. If the candidate's got an Indian surname, I put it in a separate file in the bin. And he said this to Anis, okay. And so Anis told me this, and I said, you know, we've got to do something about it. I said, well, why don't we send fake applications? The only difference is one has an English traditional surname, one has an Indian surname. And we did. And we found that you're half as likely to get an offer for a job just having an Indian surname. What was extraordinary was that Anis and I got arrested, charged with fraud. And I remember the policeman coming round to my house. Rao, who's now a junior doctor, was in my arms. He was about 6 weeks old. And two lovely policemen, actually, who knew me from casualty and sort of said, oh, I really apologise, Sam. You know, we've been sent around to arrest you. And we had a long chat and a discussion. That wasn't the first time I'd been arrested by the police. I used to be a graffiti artist, tobacco persons. In fact, there's a lovely moment.
We're sponsored by Mulberry, do you know? No, we're not. No.
One of my funniest moments was about 6 or 7 years ago when I applied to be a member of the GMC Council, and it was Graham Cato who interviewed me, and there was two very senior lay interviewers. And the interview went really well. You know, I'd been a CHI commissioner, the predecessor of CQC, so I had everything in my CV. And then the killer question at the end, it said, is there anything, if it came out, would be embarrassing to the organisation? So I looked at Graham, I said, yes, actually, I've got a caution for criminal damage, I've been arrested and charged with fraud, and I've been admonished by the GMC. Where would you like me to start? It was so funny. Because the caution was, as a junior doctor, I'd graffitied cigarette advertisements. I've still got them, I must publish them, I've got all the pictures.
Yeah, let us have them, we'll publish them.
A lovely moment, I mean the funniest moment. There was two funny moments doing that. One was by King's Cross, which is where I got my caution. I got bundled into the car by the policeman, and they sort of, halfway down the road, they then said, well, yeah, what do? You know, you vandal or whatever. I said, well, I'm a doctor. And then he said to me, well, don't you think it's cowardly to go out and do this at night? And I said, well, it's really difficult. I'm so busy working during the day. It's really spare time I've got. It's the most bizarre conversations.
So what did you write on the...
The whole idea was to write something funny. So, because
Like
it's
smoking
not...
killed?
No. Do you remember the lions, the two male lions? There are kings and there are super kings. Do you remember that ad? There's two male proud lions. And so one of them, I did a little bug which said, there are kings and there are super kings, was the caption. And the little bubble from one of the male lions to another one was, I'd rather have a super queen. Or I'd rather have a joint mate.
Uh-huh.
You know, so the whole idea was just destroy, do you know what I mean, the image they were trying to create with something funny. Occasionally we would egg bomb them. Ping pong, I should teach them that, but it's bringing back memories from a long time ago. Take an egg, get a 30mm syringe with a white needle, okay? Turn it around, you make a nice hole in the top of the egg, and then you blow air into the egg, and it empties the egg. Then you fill it full of paint, watered down paint, seal it with a candle wax.
Well, you shouldn't do that. It'll be taken off the airwaves. Yeah. So anyway, so tell me, so you were arrested. What? So they came.
So we arrested and charged with fraud because it's really interesting.
They couldn't prove that you
Well,
got any financial benefit, could you?
Well, it's not just that in fraud. It's really interesting. So it was useful that I was a lawyer because you can disadvantage somebody else. So their argument was that we'd stop somebody else from being shortlisted. Now, why we got off was we immediately turned to the hospital and said we don't want to come to you.
Right.
So they couldn't bring that argument. But then, of course, the GMC wrote us a stinking letter. This is when we were admonished and said, this is outrageous behaviour and everything like that. You know, and we said, well, actually, so what are you going to do about the doctors who've done the discriminating? And they said, nothing. We haven't had any complaints. That's when we investigated them. So we did a Dispatches TV programme, and we found they were far more likely to discipline ethnic minority doctors and give them a more serious charge. So as I say, the interview was really funny, but guess what? They appointed me. And I thought, good for you, good for you. I think they'd recognised that Anise and I had a lot of support and following from ethnic minority doctors, and that actually gave quite a strong message to ethnic minority doctors. If I was going to be part, or Anise would be part of the GMC.
As Periscope won't know this, but Roger Klein's in the audience tonight, who's written the seminal Snowy White Pigs report. And it just... I remember one night, I had a very close friend who was a senior HR manager in the NHS. I won't mention his name, but he was black. And we stopped at a restaurant on the way back from a meeting, and I was in the car. I said, pop in, see if they've got a table. I'll park up. He came out, he said, there are no tables. And I looked through the window, I could see there were plenty of tables. So I parked the car, went in, I said, we've got a table for two, and they said, yeah, sure, would you like to sit? So I brought it back in, and I said, you know what, you can stick the table up your backside, because I wouldn't eat here if it's the last place on earth. It was clearly a piece of prejudice, and it's the first time I'm all right because I'm white. It's the first time in my life I'd come across prejudice like that, and I was stunned. And it was a big wake-up call for me. But we still have the problem. It's obvious we still have a problem. Interesting development, the FT this week, the diversity project in the city. Some of the big accountancy and venture cap companies are now starting to do reports on diversity and so on. But I suppose I led a sheltered life, you know, and I'd grown up with in a mixed neighbourhood. I just find it astonishing that we're still in 2016 having to bother with this.
I think the truth is, actually, I think what Anise and I learnt over the years was we all discriminate, and you have to work hard at not doing it.
Well, you have to have you can have preferences, but you can't have prejudices.
Well, so where does it sink into just a preference? Do you know what I mean? I think.
Well, if you're my GP, right? Yeah. You're a grumpy old white man, okay? And you look after me for years, and you retire. And I'll go down one day to see you, and you've retired, and they've got Jennifer Brown, who's the new is your replacement. And I'm sitting there talking to my granddaughter about a spot on my thing. I don't want to do that. Is that discriminating against women in medicine, or is that prejudice, or is that just a preference?
I think it's just an old person that doesn't want change. Couldn't resist that one.
That's told me.
No, you have to help people on that journey. So people find change and difference difficult to cope with. I remember when I started as a doctor, as a GP, they said, oh, you look far too young to be a GP, and you build up a relationship. And actually, by the way, so I treat lots of women, Bangladeshi women, Muslim women with veils. Actually, once people get to know you, I'm trying to find the right word, they don't see you as a man anymore, or a woman. And that actually is what I want. I'm almost reaching the point where I get really irritated when I get labelled as a man. You know that bit in the newspapers, the male age or male? Actually, I'm not, I'm Sam. I'm a lot of different things. And that is the beauty, actually, when you're a doctor and people get to know you. They stop seeing you as a man or a woman or anything else. They see you as yourself. And it's about helping them on that journey and dealing with that immediate instinct that they've got, that you are a man or a woman or you're black or whatever it is that you are, and see you for what you are as a human being. And that is critical, and it reminds me of the lesson I learned when I was at BMA House when the bus bomb went off, and had to deal with the casualties. And I came back that night and thought, what is it that somebody can be so dehumanise people in their minds that they can go and blow them up? And it's about not knowing them.
Are you happy to talk about that morning?
Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
So I was at BMA House and all the other senior people had left. They'd gone to the Law Society, actually, to look at what the Law Society was doing. So there was very few doctors around, and I was upstairs. I can't remember whether I was deputy chair at that point. I stood in as deputy chair for 6 months, and I stood in the chair as the BMA for 6 months. And I was up in the chair's office and I heard it and I knew what it was. I'd been in Whitehall a few years previously when a bomb had gone off. Knew what it was. I tore downstairs and went outside BMA House, and it was awful. It was quiet, it was weird. What I remember was you could hear the pigeons squawking and just this deadly silence happening. And nobody even crying, actually, even the injured were just utterly shocked. The bomber was on the ground in front of me, well, what was left of him. And I remember then, actually, there was a scare as the policeman came along and said, actually, so I rounded everything up and got doctors, got everyone engaged, involved, ensuring each casualty had a person attached to it. And I can remember taking the sheets off the tables, the table stuff as bandages. It might have been BMA House, but it wasn't a hospital. We had bare stuff, and we had to move all the casualties in, actually, and get them off the bus because there was the risk of a second bomb. And so we got them in, and probably the last one left BMA House about 2.5 hours later, because of course all the other bombs had gone off. This was the last bomb to go off. And no, it was desperately sad. And I suppose the good thing was actually there were a lot of doctors on site. I mean, in a bizarre way, it could have happened in a better place. People asked me whether we saved lives, and I said I have no idea. But actually, I hope we did. And I hope
have you ever
we
met
did.
anyone that?
Well, we did. We met some of them. There was a lovely moment actually a few weeks later where we got one of the GP's wife. I'm trying to remember her name. Was an opera singer, an amazing opera singer, and we had this ceremony in the courtyard. She sang, and it was just, and a lot of people and the relations came. And actually the relations were there, then given the opportunity to talk to a lot of doctors who'd been there. And I think that was quite helpful. A lot of doctors found it really hard, actually. I had to do the TV stuff that night, and then the next few days I and a colleague contacted all the doctors. And some of the doctors were really in a bad way. The worst, there was one from Jersey and Glasgow who went back to a normal life, and they found it most difficult. At least actually we had people to talk to. There was one I just rang up, who I think he was the head of it, I was just a gynaecologist at the time actually, and he just said, "No, Sam, thanks for ringing, that's fine, I'm okay." And that was okay. I remember coming home that night to my family, and my son Rao was sitting watching telly and just looking up and saying, "Oh, hi Dad," and carrying on watching telly. It was bizarre. And then the next day, going in and doing new surgery again was just. Finally, one of my partners came in to me and said, "You just go," because I was doing TV interviews and things like that at the time too. But I think the thing that really hit me was the importance of Bromley by Bone. You know, actually, if you come to Bromley by Bone, you will see people of all ethnicities, religions. You will see a woman with a veil sitting next to a white young man. Where else do you see that in society? You know, we stick with our groups. And to me, it's why primary care in particular has such, and the health service generally has such a critical role in bringing together people in society. So that actually, because you know what it's like if you know somebody, you know, it's very, very different. But if you don't know somebody, it's much more easy to be angry or say the wrong things or cruel things.
I've just got around the time. So, I mean, the future really, I guess, it's the future of primary care. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm very much in two minds about where we go with primary care. You know, is it, setting aside the fact you're doing 93% of first contacts, I think it is, for 7% of the money. I mean, setting aside the money thing, let's assume that can be sorted, whatever that means. Is it reasonable, given the number of GPs there are, the premises that we've got, the inability to expand a lot of these premises, to insist on bringing more services out of hospital and giving them to the GPs to do, where there often aren't the skills, not even the willingness often to do it? Or do we just say, look, you know, let's follow Tesco's. You can have Tesco's Extra in the high street, which might be primary care unplugged, you know, fairly uncomplicated, and we'll just go back to shoving stuff back in the hospital. Because, you know, from my personal point of view, you know, if I want to see my GP, it's, you know, bless them, they work their socks off, but I can't get in to see them. Their idea of running a business has nothing to do with me. I can't. And I'll be perfectly honest, the last time I saw a GP, I paid to see a private GP in London because I couldn't do it any other way. I couldn't go into A&E. And, you know, and I think, you know, why would I go to a GP who's going to say, well, you need a blood test, they'll take a blood test, and they'll take it away. Some bloke called Harry turns up in a van and it disappears into the system, and you have to ring up to see what your tests are. I'm not going to palaver about with all that. I'm going to go somewhere where I can get a test, a scan, a diagnostic, an answer, walk in, get it fixed, walk out. Why would I bother with a GP?
So, but that's you, and you're very like probably about 70% or people like my son, who are a different generation. They've got a problem, they want it sorted now, and yes, we need to provide a different service for them. But if you take the other 30%, they want something very different. And I think we've forgotten sometimes the real value of the GP, and that's that ongoing relationship. And we've often forgotten it because we're having to tick so many boxes and do a whole raft of things. That's why I always overrun on time, but the deal with my patients is you'll have your problem solved. You'll be listened to. It's that person coming in distress and crying and just listening to them. Actually, sometimes you're a parent quite a lot of the time. You're saying things like, oh, well done, giving up something. It's the long-term relationship. You know, there's very little left in society that actually creates that relationship outside your family. So, you know, the church, the pubs, all these things are going. It's the one thing that's left. And the final example I wanted to give you is a patient of mine. So I give all my patients with terminal illness or really complex care. They get my email address, my mobile phone number. And take terminal illness. So if you've got terminal illness, do you want to die in hospital or at home surrounded by your family?
Well, it's funny you should say, because I just
got an answer.
I just got myself into trouble really, because I went to a conference and it was about end of life care. I wrote a book a few years ago called Bereavement Management for Managers, and we all had to write down how we wanted to die at this conference.
So some people said, to die, with a head on a lavender pillow, looking at a blue sky. And other people said, I want to die with my family around me, holding hands and kissing a couple. I said, I want to die having been shot by a 23-year-old jealous husband.
So you mean at home?
But the answer is, I want to die like my mum died. She died in a lovely hospice in my arms. In my arms at dawn with the sound of a blackbird, which I'll never forget. So, yeah, we'd all like
what
a
you're
good
describing
end.
is home. You're
Yes.
not describing
No.
So,
no.
60% often are still dying from terminals in hospital. And one of our vanguards, by the way, so I'm national advisor of the vanguards, they reduce death in hospital from terminals from 48 to 14%. And how they've done it is have very senior skilled nurses on 24 hours a day, Skype consulting. And if you talk to the patients who are receiving this service, because it's what I do, but not with Skype, I do it on my mobile phone, is what they'll tell you is they're in control of their life and death. So they're not going to appointments at the hospitals.
It's
to
pain.
they're getting what they want.
What
when
comes
they
out
want it.
clearly, people at home, is about pain management
Yeah.
and continence,
Yeah.
because families can't manage
Yeah.
incontinence.
And we can manage that at home. If we focus on what's really important as GPs, on the continuity of care, terminal care, all these things, and find a different way of managing you and all the other youngsters, okay, we can give people something really special. And that's that long-term relationship.
But again, I
Continuity
come
of
back to
care.
the point I made earlier, they're not all Sam Everingtons, and that's the problem.
Well, it's really interesting, you know. I've always thought patients are incredibly adaptive, actually, they're doctors. You know, and when you get to know somebody, you just work your way around their characteristics, even if they are a bit grouchy and things like that. It's quite extraordinary. You still value the relationship because it's somebody you've known for a long time. So I'm less worried. Anyway, I mean, everyone's different. So I think that's fine.
I think I might have to
Patients
move,
manage that.
Sam, and get on your list. Right, I've just got an eye on the time. Let's have a conversation. Is there anybody who'd like to ask Sam something? Join in? Tell him he should have been a barrister. He would have been much better off. Who would like to say something? I can't believe there isn't anybody. Yes, ma'am. Could you just tell us who you are and your PIN number?
Claire MacDonald. I've met Sam on a couple of occasions over the years, which I can't remember. But you've mentioned a number of times the number of fast food restaurants per schools in Tower Hamlets being 42, including in presentations that I do. Do you think that you'll be able to have impact on the bigger public health issues that are leading to the problems you see in Bromley by this closer partnership with the council, for instance?
So can I just contextualise that, because it's a very good question, because part of the Simon's 200-week plan is a 2% reduction in demand through public health measures. And the question is that achievable? It's part of that.
So entirely so. So if you look into Hamlets, rich and poor life expectancy difference 11 years, but worse than that actually is age of old age is 20 years different. So in Tower Hamlets, pathologically you will be 75 at the age of 55. It's really grim. But it tells you something that it's not going to be secret cancer cures or some heart treatment or something. It's absolutely going to be about lifestyle. And that's the inequalities, isn't it? And we've shown with stuff we've done in primary care, so despite the deprivation of Tower Hamlets, the challenges, best blood pressure and cholesterol control in the country with early evidence of reduction in heart disease, stroke and complications of diabetes. And hospital people and everyone always talks about the stroke units. Any idea how many people lives are saved in stroke units across the country a year? How many tens of thousands? And somebody say a number. 96. Okay. Keep things in perspective. I would argue if we can, and we can, do what we're doing in Tower Hamlets, because if we can do it there, you can do it across the rest of the country. It's a complicated story, but it's not difficult. If we do that, that is the thing that's going to have the biggest impact. It's the flu vaccinations. And we've got the best children vaccination, 94% in London. actually, because of the way that we're doing things very systematically. We didn't have measles problem in Tower Hamlets. Vaccinate everyone with flu vaccinations. I mean, these things are the things that's going to count. And we made our high streets healthy, isn't it? We've got to change the planning rules that enable us to create real centres of communities. Ideally, get rid of gambling shops. That's ruining people's lives. But actually, create a high street, and it's an opportunity there, isn't there? There isn't just Starbucks and some chicken shop. It's 42 chicken shops per secondary school place in Tower Hamlets. And I jest not when I tell my patients to go to McDonald's. That's the healthy end of the market. I mean, this is grim stuff. A 5-year-old in Tower Hamlets, 50% vitamin D deficient, 50% have severe dental caries. None of my kids do. I thought my teeth are awful. I thought that had gone. 10% below the national average in terms of cognitive development. 11% obese, doubled by the age of 13. This is a ticking time bomb for the future. It's an absolute disaster. It's why actually we've given the school nursing contract to the psychologists in Tower Hamlets. It's why we dashboard everything in Tower Hamlets. We want to see a dashboard in schools. Actually, shouldn't the head teacher know how healthy their kids are compared with the neighbouring schools? Shouldn't a parent know, actually? I mean, I've got 5 kids now, actually. Do you know what I'm most interested in when it comes to schools? Is it about the GCSEs or the A-level results? No. Is my child going to be happy and healthy in the school? And yet we have no way of measuring that whatsoever. Look at the school in Stirling, the primary school.
Daily Mile.
Daily Mile of the teachers and kids, and guess what? Virtually eradicate obesity.
Terry and I went to, where was it we went to?
Morecambe Bay.
Morecambe Bay, where the school's there. They had me walking around the playground and it killed me. Yeah, well, all the kids, and in the rain, they do it. And the headmistress, who was lovely, she said, we've been doing this for 18 months now. She said, I've lost a stone.
No, 2 stone. I thought
Yeah,
she was thrilled to bits.
Do you know the most healthy elderly people I've ever seen? So I've got involved in the National Gardening Scheme. In fact, I was on Women's Side recently. Mary Berry.
Is there nothing
That
that
was
you're not
wonderful.
involved with? Not Mary, you'd say Mary Berry, you genuflect slightly.
Actually, we had breakfast together.
Oh.
And she very guiltily. I mean, I felt very sorry for her because she felt very guilty then talking about cakes with me.
Yeah.
And she said, "But one cake, I'm sure that's okay, isn't it, Sam?" Anyway, so I went to the National Gardening Scheme conference. I did a keynote speech on the Bromley by Bow social prescribing. And what was in front of me was people who were 60, 70, 80, 90-year-old. But guess what? Not obese, happy and healthy, and their lives are really important, and hence the policy document, the King's Fund here, on gardening and health.
Employ a gardener, you'll save a life.
No,
John,
do it yourself.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. John.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of coming round, as Roy mentioned earlier. But one of the things that strikes me is it's a fantastic place at Bromley by Bow, and clearly you're one of the key inspirations for driving all of that. How do we extend the franchise of that around the rest of the country? We come across this regularly with the Academy of Fabulous stuff. You know, there's still an intrinsic, not invented here, kind of an obstacle. How do we get the excellence that you're doing there adopted quickly elsewhere in the country?
So Bromley by Bow is not me, and you will have seen that. You didn't. It
I
was a short visit, so you didn't see a lot of other people. But I can walk out there tomorrow. There's something about a mothership and creating that. So there's lots of people there. Secondly, 15 years ago we were off the planet. I mean, everyone thought we were mad at what we were suggesting. Completely different now. So there's a social prescribing network now, 500 people doing social prescribing across the country. There's Angela Lennox, a GP friend of mine in Leicester, who's got a police station in her waiting room. By the way, this is the same as Bromley by Bow. So she worked out the crime rate on the local housing estate was the key health issue. And if you meet those 2 coppers there, actually, I'll never forget it, the blue light above one of the doors. And they'll tell you 2 things. One is they're liked by the community. This is a new experience to them. And secondly, their bosses think they're wonderful because they've reduced the crime rate on the local housing estate to 20% of what it was. And people are queuing up to go on the housing estate. So the answer is, it is actually everywhere. But if you're looking visually to see something that's exactly the same as Bromley by Bow, you won't see that. It's something about a mindset. And as I say, to the point now where Forward View mentioned, one of the 10-point plans, meetings with health ministers Downing Street, they get it. I mean, I don't want to mention the word big society, but this is exactly what it should have been about. People get it, actually, and it's very interesting. If you bring politicians of any spectrum, they come and they just get this is the right thing to do. It's about community cohesion, it's about community regeneration, it's about what matters to people. And it's something you can put anywhere. So a friend of mine as a GP on the west coast of Scotland, where I spend a lot of my time, so what did he do? Little surgery, single-handed practice. Actually, the key issue to the little village was they were going to lose their post office and shop. So what did he do? Set up a co-op. He was a founder of the co-op. Fantastic shop now, still the post office there. Next problem, elderly patients had to move 20 miles away to a nursing home. So what did he do? Got supported housing built next to the surgery. You know, actually, it does happen everywhere. And people get it, and there's a big movement. I think, I always say that actually once something hits a 15%, it just takes off. And I think we're at the point of takeoff now, and the evidence there is the fact that all the vanguards have an element of social prescribing, and you've got these 500 people, and you've now got NHS England appointing Mike Dixon as the lead for social prescribing in NHS England. So it's a very different moment.
And of course the important thing is that we'll have better GP practices if we just inspect them more.
Yeah, well, gosh, do you want me to say something about that? Yeah,
I just want to prove I'm not the only person in the country that hates a CQC.
I mean, CQC, somebody from CQC?
Don't get it going.
Okay.
Oh no, go on, do.
So the budget for CQC, 250 million. That's what they're spending. Okay. Then you've got the parallel cost of the hospitals, another 250 million. Then you've got the inspectors being taken out of the system when we're short of all these people. So when you look at the total cost, and then the things they make people do. So Whipps Cross was a classic example. Inspected, didn't do well. What was it CQC said? You've got to employ a lot more senior nurses. What did they do? They went out and they got locums. What happened? Finances, problem, quality down, and it was worse next year. So you get a sense of what I think about CQC. And Don Berwick would tell you there's no evidence that this delivers quality improvement.
Could you just add to that list Deming, Charles Handy, Heinzig, who else? I mean, I don't know any management, anyone who studies management would tell you that inspection works. And I put myself on the list. I mean, I've been saying it since it started, that it won't work. But you talk to Jeremy Hunt, and he is completely wedded to the idea, because he's terrified to change it, because it will look like he doesn't care about quality anymore. So he's in a complete cul-de-sac. But if you said to him, look, Alan Milburn started inspection with a vengeance because that was all he could do, but now there's so much more we can do because that was 16 years ago. But he won't have it. He's terrified of not looking like he cares about quality. It's got to stop, because you're right. You know, £500 million, and what have we got? 70% of hospitals that have got a problem with the CQC, and God knows how many practices.
And the irrelevance to patients. So 95% of my patients will choose to go to Barts. Now, are they really interested in the organisation? No. You've got a problem with your bowels, you've got increased frequency in bowel motions. Okay, for example. Actually, you might have cancer. If you go to Barts, actually, there's a consultant there who will remove part of your bowel and leave you with the least chance in the country of having a colostomy. Well, where's that information? And that's what the patient cares about. Not the fact it's inadequate or 3-star rating or any of this stuff. They want to know, when they're sitting there with me, is are they going to end up in the right place that's going to get them the best chance of a good outcome? That's the important information. Labeling a whole hospital is just mad, because there is good and bad in every hospital. We dashboard every practice in Tower Hamlets. And guess what? There's good and bad in every practice. as a result, we found one of our surgeries was the worst antibiotic prescribed in Tower Hamlets. We produced this data in real time. Guess what? We turned that round in 2 months' time. That's what you get if you focus on quality improvement.
And study the data. Listen, Sam, I could sit and talk to you all night. Has anybody got any last minute thing they'd like to add, say,
Yeah,
do?
I'd like.
Yes.
Sam,
No,
I was on a course, an NHS leadership course for GP, and he was very concerned that, you know, his view was that as a GP, really you can't win. On the one hand, you are blamed for diagnosing something late because of when the patient presents and some of the things that you go through before you get to the actual diagnosis. On the other hand, you get blamed if you refer too quickly. And so he was just saying that whatever you seem to do as a GP seems to have a negative connotation, either in the press or from the acute sector. And actually there's so much more that you can do as a GP, because you don't always have to refer someone in first. You know, you explore various things. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I think you've got to have confidence in yourself as an individual, is the answer to that. Yes, I get that. I think it's pretty unprecedented, the attacks. And the regulators are part of that process, actually. And that's very destructive. You know, if you walk across the border as a GP to Scotland, the indemnity fees are a third as GP. You have to ask yourself what all this regulation, the negativity and the blame culture is actually doing. And to me, the devastating part of it is it's breaking that compact with society about the NHS. It feels very different in Scotland. They feel proud, they feel an ownership, they feel responsibility. What I see is something, if you go on to NHS Choices, I mean, it's the most malignant stuff. It's all about the negative. So I'm a fan of TripAdvisor. I think that's absolutely great. So I'd love patients to feedback, but let's have the balance. Let's have the balance. You know, I often say in conferences, put your hand up as a doctor if you've had a complaint against you. Hands go up. I said, put your hands up if you've ever complained about someone informed me of patient, and no hands go up. There's a massive inequality here, and that has broken the compact, which is actually, it's about rights and responsibilities. So actually the focus always from politicians is you have a right. The NHS Constitution says, actually, rather than actually you have responsibilities too. And that to me is where the tragedy lies, and that's what I think creates that sense. How you counteract it, how do I counteract it as a GP? Well, the answer is actually being very honest and frank with patients and saying when you don't know. GPs get into trouble when you say something with confidence that you shouldn't have. So I quite often will say to a patient, you know, I don't know what's going on here. And I say it confidently. I say, but how about this for a plan? And actually if you do that, and you always end the consultation by saying to a patient, look, if you've got any worries, just come back. In other words, you don't close the door. You will always be forgiven by a patient. Patients understand that it's not an exact science. Do you know what I mean? They understand it's difficult. It's that safety netting which is the key. The way the doctors get into trouble is where they've been angry or irritable or whatever. Biggest mistake out. Biggest mistake out. How you behave with patients is critical. Even if I don't know patients, I always look at notes beforehand, so that actually in the consultation or at the beginning I can come out with a little gem, a little bit, and they think, shit, how the hell did he know that? What it does in terms of that relationship is quite fantastic. It gives a very strong message. Even if somebody's 95 years old and they're a smoker, guess what? I'm having a go at them about giving up. And you might say, what am I doing there? Because actually some people would say, well, you're 95, what's in that? But you know what message you're giving all the time? If you do that, you're saying, you're important, I care about you, my job. And I often say to the patient with a bit of a smile, my job's to nag you. I'm here to get you living longer and living better.
Sam, what a great evening. And now you know why house prices in Tower Hamlets are so high, because they've got such fantastic houses. Haven't we had a great evening? Sam, you've been an absolute star. Before we let you go, we've got a little gift. It's a traditional gift that we give all our guests. Yes. Well, it's a bottle of whiskey, and it's the best whiskey in the world. It's Welsh whiskey. Yes, I know.
I come from Scotland.
I know.
Spent a lot of time there.
Absolutely, but
You're on dangerous territory.
you sometimes you have to be a contrarian, and I think you are. So that's for you. And we all give it all to all our gifts. It won't matter to you, but what we do like about it is that as far as Jeremy Hunt and people like that are concerned, when we give it to them, it's just above the threshold where they have to declare it. We love the idea of Roy Lilley appearing in the name of gifts for the Secretary of State. But anyway, listen, I hope you enjoy it. We've enjoyed you, Sam Everington.